Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Jeff and today we're going to have some fun talking about the top 10 best cards in Kaldheim. And so I really wanted to make two different lists here. And so I'm actually going to make two different videos. One of my top 10, the cards I think are the best, the things that will shake up the format the most and ultimately just be the best cards from Kaldheim that we will see over and over again. And then I also wanted to make one that was all about the most fun cards. And those will have different cards in them. With this one in my best 10, first off, I like doing things a little bit differently than most people where, normally you start off with 10 and go up to 1 and make it a huge climax, all that kind of stuff. Instead, for me, if it's an obvious and definite one, I just want to talk about it. We're going to get it straight up. So if you guys like that kind of content, if you like just kind of being sincere and straightforward and a little bit more, that's my style a little bit more. It's more about having fun and sincere rather than, getting the psychology of making sure that you fall for the YouTube tricks or things like that. But that also means that I get less subscribers, things like that. And so if you guys don't mind, just it would be helpful if you wouldn't mind hitting the subscribe button, like button, all that kind of stuff. I definitely appreciate it. Anyway, we're going to be diving into this. I do have a lot of honorable mentions. Same to that true form. I put them all at the end here. This is basically a top 20 list, but we're going to stick with the top 10, the ones that I think for sure will be changing up the format, for sure will be really powerful cards in this and have the ability to compete up against Throne of Eldraine. Like a lot of people have been mentioning in the comments where it's like, just nothing really changes anything from this. I disagree. There's some cards that are so busted, that are so good, or so that they have the ability to create new decks out there that I think that these are worth talking about. And so we're diving right into those, starting with number 1 here, Voraclex. And these number 1, they can definitely interchange different slots here, but this is probably the one card that I think that deserves the top slot. And Voraclex Monstrous Raider, 6 mana, 6/6, trample haste. A lot of you guys have seen this one probably, but if you would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent player instead. So if you are playing out a Planeswalker, then it enters with double the number of permanent counters because it would enter in. And so you can immediately ultimate with a bunch of different Planeswalkers with Voraclex. The other side of this, and also just plus some counters, there's flying counters. They get 2 fighting counters, which doesn't do anything, but you could do that. But if an opponent would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent player instead, rounded down. This is the effect that I think is actually what will change standard. Is not only do you have the Voraclex that is busted, it's tramply and hasty at 6-drop. This is kind of like the upgraded version of Questing Beast type of thing. I feel like where it's like, okay, we had a threat on turn 4 that was really busted. Now here's an insane threat against control, against other stuff that's on turn 6, which in mono green a lot of times you can ramp up into it, and with other decks you can ramp up into it pretty easily. And the value of this is pretty huge. The main thing is that this interacts with Ugin. There's a lot of decks where Ugin is basically the only board wipe. It's the way that it deals with everything. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to survive, gain enough life, do whatever it takes to get up to Ugin, have enough chump blockers, and then Ugin will come down and clear whatever board I need to, and that's good enough. Voraclex is a direct answer to Ugin. As long as it's on the board, Ugin only enters with 3 counters because it's half rounded down. And so instead of 7, it would come in with half, would go down to 3 or 4, and then it rounds down to 3. With 3 convert mana costs, like only Ugin only being able to -3 changes the format completely. Not the format entirely. If Ugin's still good, you're still gonna be playing Ugin. In fact, Voraclex with Ugin is really good. Now it comes in with 14 counters. You can ultimate immediately instead. So like it's not like it's Ugin's gonna go away or anything like that. But I think Voraclex does add a whole other. It's the wrench that gets thrown into the system here. I think that it's really powerful, really fun. It stops sagas from being able to put counters onto sagas. Like if this is on the battlefield, the saga does not get the next lore counter. Like there's a lot of really cool things that Voraclex can do to kind of shut down a lot of things out there, or it can put 2 counters onto it. I'm not exactly sure how that ends up working out for sagas, but it's just a really powerful card. I think it adds a lot of power to any deck that can run green, which by the way, now that we have all the pathway lands, is basically all the decks. This is a legendary creature, which means that there's a whole legendary atmosphere out there. And that's the thing. So Voraclex doesn't just go into one deck. It goes into like 10 to 15 pretty decent decks, and which ones end up being tiered 1 or whatever, I'm not sure, but there's just some really, really cool stuff that it can do overall. And so I just want to say that Voraclex is probably my top pick for being number 1 as far as changing up meta, at least enough that this is a big threat. First off, it's tramply haste and 6/6. That alone are crazy stats, honestly, for 6 mana in green. You know, like that's really good. Typically you have to there was the 5 mana Monstrosaur writer back in Ixalan that was 5 mana 5/5 with trample and haste, or no, just haste. I think I did have trample, and there was no other text on it at all, and that was played quite a bit still because it was powerful. This being at 6 mana, having a ton of amazing, very relevant text in the format is going to see lots of play, and it's really good. All right, let's jump into the next one. Righteous Valkyrie, 3 mana 2/4 flying angel cleric, which are relevant creature types as well. Whenever another angel or cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. As long as you have at least 7 more life than your starting life total, creatures you control get +2/+2. This is a really good card. Just the effect, the only downside of this is that it's only angels or clerics that gain life when it enters the battlefield, but you can also play this with itself, and it gains life equal to its toughness. And so even if you go Righteous Valkyrie 1, Righteous Valkyrie number 2, you're gaining 4 life. You could end up just pumping your board by 4 as soon as you play those. Like, that's the other thing. This isn't a legendary card. This is just really good. So what are the other decks that are already trying to gain up to 7 life? Well, there is already the mono white life gain with Daxos, with, trying to get up to 27 life so you can get what's the priest that ends up tapping down and creating an angel. I can't think of a name right now. I'm thinking Priest of Forgotten Gods, but that's the different one. Anyway, there's a bunch. So there's already a deck where you're trying to get up to 7 life and already have a payoff for that. Now you might just be adding in maybe a couple extra clerics, maybe splashing black for like the cleric deck if you want to go for clerics. Maybe adding in a couple different angels. There's another angel on this one that I think adds into this as well. And then you also just can gain life other ways. Daxos is already gaining you life, or gaining you life through different means. What's the Linden also gains you life. I think Righteous Valkyrie fits right into that slot, being as powerful or more so than Linden, even in a deck that's not necessarily focused on angels and clerics, just because there's enough life gain in other ways. If you get up to 7, then everything gains more life. Then all of a sudden your all seated life bounties are 3/3 swinging in, or your I can't think of the priest. What is his name? But like, he has vigilance and lifelink. If he's a +2/+2, or let's say he gets +4/+4, he's now a 5/5 vigilance lifelinker. There is just busted things that you can do with Righteous Valkyrie. So I think that this adds a ton of value into the white deck. Any deck that can gain enough to get up to 7 life, with clerics or everything. There's a bunch of janky decks that I want to build up there too. There's like some green clerics you can go into. You going into Historic. This is a perfect, really busted Collected Company target as well. Like, this is just a really powerful card. Being able to give everything +2/+2 and have it not be a legendary effect at 3 convert mana cost. And also hard to kill. Like, Scorching Dragonfire doesn't kill this. Ugin doesn't just kill us with its +2 ability. It gets away from a lot of the removal that's out there. Does get hit by Skyclave Apparition, but this is also going to be a deck that's running Skyclave Apparition, and so it's like, yeah, it's good. Anyway, let's jump into some other stuff. So, Torolf God of Fright. This one kept raising higher and higher the more that I read it, the more that I was like, at first it was like number 10, number 8 on my list. And now it's at number 3, just because I think this is a really busted card. It's good. It is really good stuff. So first off, let's talk about the not as cool side of it, even though it's super cool. The artifact first. So 4 mana, legendary artifact. You can play on both sides. There's a modal land, a modal card. Tap it, target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. So that is the Torment of Hellfire effect. And there has been, there was a card way back when, Torment of Scarabs, I think it was, that created that effect. It was every time on their upkeep, before they drew cards, before they did anything, they had to sacrifice. So it was kind of like a Doom Foretold type of deck that would eventually get them to where they lose 3 life or whatever. Turgid's Lantern, I think, being legendary, you can't like stack them up and have multiples. It does have some downsides, but there is the side of, you can just pay for, untap it, and then have this effect multiple times. And if you get to a point where you like, even if you're top decking or whatever, you have 8 mana and this on the battlefield, getting this effect 3 times in a turn actually starts adding up pretty intensely for a lot of players, where they have to sacrifice non-land permanents or discard a card. If you're playing up against token stacks, things that play in like a lot of food, a lot of other stuff, this isn't going to get there necessarily. So that side of it, I don't think is necessarily game changing or anything like that, but it is a powerful effect, even if you don't get to the other side of this card, which is the more busted side of it. It is absolutely insane. 5 mana, legendary god, 4/5 with menace. So even some extra text in there because the rest of this is busted. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. What? Yeah, exactly. This is insane. This is, and this is kind of the reason why I'm putting it up so high, is how it affects with what else is out there right now. Is let's say that there is Skyclave apparitions out in the battlefield, and you have a Soul Scatter, or these are cards that haven't really seen play. Soul Shatters, Duress really hasn't seen a ton of play, even though there's a lot of good uncommon or non-creature spells that are being played. I haven't seen a ton of Duress because there's just other things you can be doing or whatever. Tergrid just adds so much value where, play this on turn 5 or maybe turn 6, Duress them, discard their Ugin. Now you have Ugin. That's the kind of thing that Tergrid can do. Skyclave apparition, make them use Soul Shatter, I think is the card, where it forces the highest mana cost or the highest power thing to be sacrificed on their side of the board. They sacrifice it, you get it to your side of the board and get to take something of theirs. Or if it's their Voraclex, or if it's something big and massive and crazy like that, you get the effect instead. And so I think Tergrid, while I just think it's an ultimately very, very powerful effect. If this is on the board, it's busted, and it goes into a deck that's already really good, being control-y, being having just value engine ways to win. This is probably a card that goes into an Ugin type of deck, so there's already powerful things in there, but you get extra value for playing a full play set of Duress. You get extra value for playing discard spells, getting extra value for just playing a ton of removal, which that's one of the biggest downsides of those decks typically, is that there's not you're only interacting and never getting to a place where you can actually win. And up against aggro decks, that's really bad. But if you can play out Tergrid, and then the turn after, first off, it's a 4/5. It's a really good blocker for everything that's going to be happening on the board if you haven't already board wiped. And then you just, anytime they play something big, discard their Embercleave, throw that onto Tergrid. Whatever, force them to sacrifice an artifact somehow. I'm not, there's different cards that work well versus others, but if there's ways to make that happen, an Embercleave onto Tergrid is pretty busted stuff. It has menace. It'll be a 5, that ends games in 2 turns, as well as just being busted and doing everything else. So I think this is a really powerful card. I've actually been surprised that it hasn't come up as a lot of people haven't been ranking as high as I think they should be. But it's a really, really good card. We're definitely going to be doing some fun stuff with it. This is the more serious top 10, but also good things are fun as well, and there's a lot of really cool things that are happening. Next on this list, this is also one that I initially didn't even have in the top 10, but I kind of saw it in gameplay with Versus Live on Star City Games. And the more and more I thought about it, this card just is actually really powerful. And again, the top 10 as far as things that I think will change meta the most, things that will enable a lot more decks, or we'll see tons of play. We'll see this very, very often. I think Ascendant Spirit fits into that perfectly. It will be seen a ton because there is a lot of good stuff for Snow. And this also just gets slotted into, there's a mono blue decks, there's a bunch of stuff forever, anything like that. There's a lot of decks that this goes into. But the main thing I think was cool with this one is, first off, it has a lot of synergy. It's a good 1-drop, 1 mana, 1/1. Yeah, maybe not amazing, but also with 2 mana at instant speed, while you're holding up other kinds of interactions, maybe you don't want a Heartless Act. They swing in without thinking about it, and all of a sudden you have a 2/3 blocker. Actually pretty good. That's actually a pretty good effect. Yeah, it can be interactive with everything like that. But then you pay 3 more, it becomes a 4/4 with flyer. That's actually a decent threat that can close out games. Now your top deck in a more control-y type of deck has a decent 1-drop that can fill out all of the slots in the curve. And that's the thing where this becomes scary, is control or tempo-y decks of any sort that aren't rogues, suddenly have another threat that's really powerful. And I think that we'll get a lot more of that tempo style of play with this. And that's where I think it becomes really, really powerful. And then the fourth ability, if it's an angel, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and it gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draws a card. The way that I think this is worded, and I could be wrong on this, but you can do this multiple times. If it's an angel, which it stays an angel, this doesn't stop it from changing it from an angel. So every turn, if you end up having 4 mana, 8 mana, whatever, you can activate this ability multiple times. And it also says it gains the text whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. I believe how that works is that you would end up having that gained onto it, add onto that text another time over and over and over again. So the first time you do this, it becomes a 6/6 flying angel that whenever it deals damage to a player, you get a draw card. Well, the next time, if you pump it again, it becomes an 8/8 with you draw 2 cards whenever this deals damage to it. Or, you know, the third, fourth time, not that games will typically go that far if you're actually dealing damage for 8 damage or that kind of thing. But I believe that's how it works. And so this is a pretty insane top deck, even in a ramp deck that has snow. You know, like that is probably the biggest issue, is that there is snow, and we have to see how powerful snow is, or how consistent the snow mana can be. If you can actually get up to 4 mana with it pretty easily in any kind of deck, or if it has to be dedicated like mono blue snow deck, which is really good in general too. There's Faceless Havens as other threats. There's, you know, just a bunch of tempo-y good plays you can play with snow in general anyway. But I think Ascendant Spirit is going to see lots of play, and I think it's one of those cards that will, the more and more people realize how to play it, it'll show up more and more, and become a really, really powerful threat. I think the main thing too is just like it's 3 mana change, gets a flying counter onto the Spirit Warrior, the Angel, and that dodges Heartless Act. That's a pretty big deal. It doesn't stop Eliminate, which I think Eliminate will be coming in, but it also doesn't kill a lot of other things. Like I think I'm so interested to see like what removal pieces come out of Kaldheim as well versus what we've already been seeing. But this can dodge a lot of different removal pretty early on as well. And if it does get killed, it was a 1 mana spell. You know, like you have other threats in your deck. It's not something you were totally invested in necessarily. I mean, once you put in a ton of mana into it, you are, but you're doing that on your end step when you could have done other things. You're holding up a counter spell or anything like that. Then you just pump this and you have it for the next turn. It's really versatile, really awesome. I think this is definitely deserving of top 10 slot. Speaking of things that deserve to be in the top 5 here. So this is number 5. Magda, Brazen Outlaw. And this is one of the cards that I feel like a lot of people were loving at first, and then I feel like it's gotten less and less attention, partly because dwarves aren't crazy powerful. The ones we got were like, okay, come on, you could have given us a few more extra, you know, good dwarves. But it's still just a busted effect. So other creatures, other dwarves you control get +1/+0. Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token. There's lots of different ways to tap them down with different things, especially because blue even got the ability, like the 1 mana tap target creature, it doesn't untap type of thing. There's actually quite a few removal spells that maybe even help this out to an extent. Then you can sacrifice 5 treasures, search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So the way that I'm ranking this is that there's already a few dwarves that do see play. Rimrock Knight and Torbrand see quite a bit of play in standard already. And I think Magda, just for the sake of working well with those, like I think you rank this kind of the same way as like Wildgrowth Walker and Explore. You were able to slot in just 4 copies of Wildgrowth Walker, 4 copies of Jade Light Ranger, and 4 copies of Merfolk Branchwalker into any deck, and it was already really powerful. I think you can kind of do the same type of thing with Magda. I don't think you have to have a million dwarves to make this powerful. I think that it's just, yeah, it is a dwarf lord, it does everything, but at the same time, just making treasures anytime you tap down stuff is actually really powerful. Like adding that ramp into decks that don't get ramp, like red, adding the ability kind of to go into other stuff. So I think this has the versatility to go into a lot of different decks. I still think it's waiting. I think this will be one that will take the longest to get to a place where the deck is consistently powerful, because I think it just takes a lot of fine tuning, tweaking to find out the ways that work best. Like what, you know, are you using equipment or vehicles with this? Are you, what exactly does it take? Are there actually good dragons to go digging for? You can also just, you know, search out your Embercleave with the 5 treasures as well. Like, are there other good treasure generators as well? Like that, there's a lot of factors in this that for sure are hard to come into. But I think one of the main reasons why this does become a deck, and maybe it is just with Rimrock Knight, Torbrand, Magda, and this card, Goldstrand Dragon, which comes in number 6, partly because of that, and also because partly Goldstrand Dragon is just so powerful in general. So 5 mana, 4/4 flying haste. I know a lot of people said that this isn't very good. Consistently throughout Standard's history, anytime there's a 4/4 flyer with haste, Glory Bringer, you know, a bunch of things that has any kind of upside versus downside, it's been pretty dang good. Like it's a pretty powerful effect. This is evasive, gets in for 4 points of damage, and it ramps you up. So yeah, you don't get the value of like Glorybringer being able to just like deal 4 points of damage and kill something, but you get the 2 extra mana right after playing this to then kill something with that, you know. Or you play this, you swing in, you know, the first turn you get up to you untap with 7 mana, you play a land, you have 8 mana, hey, that's Ugin mana. You know, you swing in Elson, you have 10 mana. So if you get to untap with this, and first off, you already get to get value right away with haste, unless people have removal right away. But I mean, threats are still threats, even if they can be removed by things. I get that, but this, if it does stay on the board at any for any length of time, it will just kind of go bonkers with the amount of mana ramp that you can get with this. Being able to give all your treasures the ability to sacrifice and add 2 mana of any one color versus everything else. So I'm a big fan of Goldspan Dragon. I think this is really powerful, really good card overall, and yeah, huge fan of this one. Let's jump into the next one, World Tree. And I'm going to go a little bit faster through all these because I've spent a lot of time already. World Tree, it's powerful just for the sake of its ability, where as long as you control 6 or more lands, you control 6 or more lands, then lands you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color. It's a chromatic lantern on a land, and I think this goes into 3-color decks. I think this goes into 4-color, 5-color decks, and I think that with the pathway lands that we have, with just better lands coming out in general, this just enables so many other decks to be powerful. And yeah, it means that the decks have to be getting up to 6 mana, so it doesn't enable like 4-color, 5-color cheap decks, but that's not what you're playing anyway typically. I think that's what I'm liking about this, is that it enables so many other decks to be more consistent, which will make them more powerful playing up against other meta decks and everything like that. And that was the whole idea of the top 10 here, is the things that will actually shake up meta, things that are so powerful, they'll see enough play, they'll shake up meta. And I think this does. The other ability of being able to pay 10, tap it, sacrifice it, search for any number of god cards from and put them on the battlefield. I mean, even if you're playing like 3 gods, like Heliod, Havar, whatever else it is, the Turgid, there's a lot of really good things you can definitely go searching for to put them onto the battlefield. There are enough gods that are easy enough to play, Clothis, whatever, that are powerful, good cards that you can play into just about any deck. That I think the World Tree definitely sees play, just like, and we'll potentially see that side of it take off as well. But I think that you play this more for the side of, okay, now I have more consistency in my 4-color deck, my 3-color, or maybe not in 3-color decks as often, unless you are playing gods as well. Then you throw 2 copies of this to kind of make sure that you have the ability to go off with the sacrifice ability, and also it does still help fix your land base and everything like that. Anyway, I think this is just a really powerful, really fun card. Super excited for it. I think that it enables a lot of new decks out there, and we'll see play because of that. There is a side of just like 5 mana or like 5-colored, just play all the best things in standard. Don't worry about it. As long as you find ways to ramp into other stuff and get World Tree on the battlefield, you untap with 6 mana and you just have all the best things in standard right now. That can actually be a pretty powerful deck. I think that there's evidence that could happen. Maybe not quite as an all ultimatums deck will be crazy. All right, next up, and this is the card that I initially had really high, and it kept kind of getting pushed down with other stuff, but really it does deserve probably to be still in the top 10. But Valkyrie, God of Lies, Loki, or Tybalt. So 2 mana, legendary god, 2/1. Whenever it enters the battlefield, for each opponent reveals their hand, for exile a card that was revealed this way until he leaves the battlefield. So it's not hard removal, but then you can pay X, choose creature card exiled with Valkyrie, with conversion cost X, Valkyrie becomes a copy of the card. I do think that this first off goes into the Turgid deck. Like there's a Rakdos Turgid deck that was probably going to be really powerful, and Valkyrie definitely adds to that, as well as having the Tybalt side of it. But people have talked a lot about the Tybalt side of it. I do want to talk about that one as well, but let's actually talk about the Valkyrie maybe a little bit more, just for a second, of actually how powerful can this be? What things are you hitting from it that can make it powerful? Lovestruck Beast. If you can hit a Lovestruck Beast with this, pay 3 mana, it becomes a 5/5 that they don't get their Lovestruck Beast back to hand very easily. That's really good. Skyclave Apparition. You get it out of their hand, but they also just get removal out of their hand. So the way to actually deal with this, Bonecrusher Giant, I feel like is the one that would be the hardest run up against, where they have a way to just kill it right away, Valkyrie. But if you can get it out of the battle, get it out of their hand, it becomes a 4/3 for 3 mana. And if they ever target Valkyrie to be able to get the Bonecrusher Giant back, they're have to take 2 points of damage for targeting it. And so I think Valkyrie just is a really good early game tempo play. The slow down decks. You can pay 3 at instant speed to turn it into a Lovestruck Beast or whatever other big busted things are, or you maybe still their Voraclex and becoming a all of a sudden you turn Valkyrie into Voraclex, play your Tybalt on turn 6, and or turn 7. Tybalt enters battlefield and can immediately ultimate, which is pretty dang good stuff. So let's talk about the Tybalt side of this, and this is where I think this card becomes really powerful. Is that you have the Valkyrie side of things. It's a good enough card that you can play in other places. I'm not sure that is better than just having straight up discard or whatever. I think that would call it into question, like, oh, okay, maybe not play this as much, especially because it's a legendary, you can't play multiple of them. But you have the other side of Tibalt. If you get up to 7 mana, then it enters battlefield, you get an emblem with, you may play cards exiled with Tibalt, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So the first ability, tick up +2, exile the top card of each player's library. So you get card advantage immediately. You suddenly have, you can only cast those spells, so you can't play them. So if you're hitting lands off the top of your deck, you don't get to play those lands, but you're already at 7 mana typically with this, so it's like, you're not that worried about it. So you tick up +2, exile the top card of your library, you get 2 cards, card advantage immediately. You also have the -3 to just exile target artifact and creature. And then the -8, exile all cards from all graveyards and add 3 mana. I love this card because it's actually pretty straightforward what it's trying to do. It's just like, it's card advantage. It does have some removal, and then you just get to exile all cards and bam, you get to play stuff. The cool side of Tibalt 2 is if it comes down for 7 mana and just exiles their Voraclex, exiles a Great Henge or whatever, well, you can actually play those things out even if Tibalt dies immediately to a Bone Crusher Giant for using the -3 or whatever, because anything that was exiled with this card, you can then cast because it's an emblem. I think the ability of having it be an emblem versus just like a static effect that's on it is what makes this so powerful. It makes it something that adds a lot of that value. And you're not just holding onto a 7 mana spell, you also have a 2 mana side of it that can put it into other decks. The range of having it be 2 mana though up into a 7 mana is a pretty intense shift, where this only goes into so many decks where you have something that you can put on turn 2 and you have the chance to get up to turn 7. I'm not sure if you play this anything other than something that will go into late game and play control a little bit more. Maybe you can use Valkyrie just like as a good tempo-y play in a deck that's not trying to get up there pretty high, but if they do draw Tibalt in the late game, they happen to draw into more lands, you can play it. Maybe that can happen, but I think Valkyrie overall is really, really powerful. Super big fan of Valkyrie and Tibalt. I think they're definitely going to be shaking that meta a lot. I think this goes in the Turgid deck that is going to be actually pretty frightening. I'm not sure if it's Grixis or Rakdos or whatever, but I think there's a deck there that is going to be really annoying to beat and really difficult, and it's going to be powerful. All right, Torolf God of Fury. This is another one that I was going to put it more in like honorable mentions, but I think that it's a scary enough card that it's worth talking about. So 4 mana Torolf or Thor, basically when it trample 5/4 trample, which is already pretty good stats. He doesn't have haste, which is the one reason why I'm not sure if he goes into like mono red aggro, but there is some other decks that he can definitely go into where I think it can end up changing up meta a little bit. So whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, Torolf deals damage equal to the excess to any target other than that permanent. So there already is this like mono red ramp deck that gets up to Ugins, that gets up to other things, that can also just like has a bunch of target removal. So let's say that you have an Ugin as well as Torolf or whatever. Like this is the biggest thing. I don't think this card necessarily goes into the straight up mono red deck, because I don't know if it beats out Torbran for being the best 4-drop in a mono red deck, and you only have so many slots for that deck. And so I do think that this is maybe a little bit different of a card rather than just that. I think this is more of a big red card, but there's been kind of this theme of big red anyway. We get the Goldspan Dragon that was coming out before. There's a bunch of just other ways that you can actually ramp up, add a little bit of extra mana. There's other things. There's a bunch of good red removal that targets creatures and planeswalkers that weren't as good because they weren't able to throw that at any other targets. I think Torolf basically turns those all into good things. There's Perforos's Punishment or whatever, the X spell with Perforos, or Shatterskull Smashing that does X damage to any creatures, or excess damage to lots of different creatures. Those are the kinds of cards that are already being played like crazy that I think Torolf just makes them 10 times better. Being able to have them do damage to one thing. So let's say Shatterskull Smashing, you deal, you put X into everything, kill the creature that actually matters, don't even care about the 1/1. And if any excess damage can be thrown to face or to the planeswalker or to wherever it needs to go, this is really, really busted. There is enough creatures being played and planeswalkers that this can target those kinds of things. And then if there aren't those things and this stays on the battlefield, it is still just a 5/4 trample. And you get around the legendary issue with the Torolf's Hammer. I don't love Torolf's Hammer. That's probably the biggest downside of this card, of like not being amazing, because it's 6 mana to be able to do 3 damage to any target. but you have a way to deal 3 damage to any target. So it's 2 mana to play, 2 mana to equip, and then equip creature has pay 2 mana, tap it. So it also has to have be hasty, or has to not have summoning sickness. Tap untouch Torolf's Hammer. It deals 3 damage to any target. Return it back to its owner's hand. So you don't even get to keep it on the battlefield and do that, for 4 mana every turn or anything like that. But you'll also get Torolf back to your hand. Equipped creature gets +3, so as long as it's legendary. So you have to play like legendary for it to actually work well for the Torolf's Hammer. So I don't think you play Torolf's Hammer like really ever. I think you play this for the Torolf, and that's why I think this goes more into like a big red deck that has the ability to give Torolf +3/+0, which is pretty big. I mean, it's trampoline, it'll be an 8/4 that can finish out games if you need to for 4 extra mana. But I think this is good because it adds Shadow Smashing, other cards that just do like big damage to creatures, things that are if you're needing to use Scorching Dragonfire on a 1/1 or a 2/2, getting that extra point of damage sending to face can close out games really well. And being able to send it to anywhere else on the board as well, to any target, is really, really powerful. So that's what I'm excited for with Torolf. I think it's good. I am putting this one up there kind of like, I think this is probably more controversial. Like, I'm not sure this necessarily deserves to be up here. I think it does for all the reasons I talked about. Let's jump into some other stuff. Glorious Protector, and this is number 10. So before we get into all the honorable mentions, this is just a really good card, and I think this is also one of the reasons that Righteous Valkyrie becomes better, is because Glorious Protector is such a powerful card. So 4 mana 3/4 flash flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may exile any number of non-angel creatures you control until he leaves the battlefield, or she leaves the battlefield, whatever. And then you can also foretell it for 3. So if you don't have to wait for turn 4 to do this. I think this is actually pretty powerful. I think I'm just trying to think of like all the different ETB type of effects that are coming in with all the different decks that are out there. Having Glorious Protector just be able to tuck everything away in case there is board wipe type of effects, just kind of protect your board state in a way to be able to have this threat. And it's whenever this leaves the battlefield. And so if it dies at any point in any way, and maybe you build this with a different side. Anyway, I'm not totally sure the exact deck this goes into. My imagination, the one that made me put it up in the top 10 was already just the mono white deck. You have Skyclave Apparition. I would gladly have this Glorious Protector flash in on an end step, pick up Skyclave Apparition, let them have the token, whatever it is, and suddenly have another threat of, if you ever kill this, my Skyclave Apparition is going to come back and take whatever your stuff you have. It'll take out Doom Foretold. It'll take out all those different things. Like, I think this is a way to protect against Doom Foretold decks. It's a way to protect against more control-y type of decks, and still have a pretty big threat that can just flash in and become a 3/4 attacker for you at instance. It flashes in. It's so pretty cool stuff. I think there is enough ETB effects with Daxos, with just enough stuff in mono white that you can do some pretty cool things with this. So it's not an angel creature, so you can't get the Righteous Valkyrie. You can't get a few other things that are out there, but you can flash this in and protect something that was about to die. You can and just have it eventually come back. This is a rebuild my board in a box with us on a stick, basically. Like, I can rebuild my board if I need to with this. And so I'm not sure this ends up being like a full playset card, but I think that this goes into one of the best decks that will be out there, which is, I think, the Righteous Valkyrie. I think mono white or like a heavy white deck will be played that has the ability to have this. And I think this goes in as a 2-of or 3-of into that deck as a way to kind of rebuild it against it. But that deck is going to be busted and insane. And Glorious Protector can also do a lot of fun shenanigans just with like Yorion. This is a secondary type of effect with Yorion. All of a sudden, okay, we're going to put Yorion underneath this, have a way to sacrifice this or blink it or bounce it or something like that, and suddenly you have tons of ETB trigger effects and everything like that. So I'm a huge fan of this card. I think it's good. There's a bunch of honorable mentions that maybe come up after this one. The biggest thing for this one, why it came up first, is because I think it will be played rather than other cards, or will be played in top tier decks, where other cards I don't think necessarily see as much play, or they may not be in top tier decks. So here, let's get into some honorable mentions. I'll try to go through these a little bit quicker. I know this is already becoming a long one, but dude, these are just fun cards. I'm really excited about Kaldheim. Okay, this is the time to be talking about it. Quakebringer and Calamity Bearer, I put these up together because they were both really good cards that I think could end up getting the top 10, but it depends completely on if the giant deck is actually valid or if it's something that's actually there. We need to see if it's going to be a Changelings deck where it's more about Changelings and Gruul type of thing, because a lot of the Changelings are green, also in blue, so you can end up having that teamer giants, because there's a lot of blue giants as well. But I've been a little bit unimpressed with a lot of the blue giants that have come out. There's a lot of different giants that in general I'm like, okay, well, there's some cool ones, but it's nothing busted. It's nothing amazing. You know, we have Cast Off, we have Bone Crusher Giant already, or Realm Cloak Giant, but that's having to go into white. There's just, I feel like the color combinations of where giants are is a little bit difficult to really see how it's going to work out. But Quakebringer is a busted card. It's amazing. It's not legendary, and so you can have this effect on the battlefield. Your opponents can't gain life first off. That effect is really powerful in the format right now. There's enough ways to gain life with Righteous Valkyrie, with everything. At the beginning of your upkeep, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. This ability triggers only if it's on the battlefield or if it's in a graveyard and you control a giant. And that's kind of where Calamity Bear also comes in, is like there's so many effects with just doing damage. Even though Calamity Bear doesn't work with Stomp side of Bone Crusher Giant, it does work with them targeting Bone Crusher Giant. Anyway, so 4 mana, 3/4. If a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. We've already seen Obosh decks be pretty powerful with different effects like that as well. And I could definitely see this just like if Calamity Bear ever stays on the battlefield, you know, you play Bone Crusher Giant, you stomp them for 2 on turn 1, you play him out turn 3, you play Calamity Bear on turn 4, you swing in, you Embercleave the one that doesn't get, or the best one, and you deal double the source damage to anything. It's just good. You know, like I think that's a pretty good curve. I think that there is a powerful, maybe not quite aggro giant deck, but like maybe like a bit of a mid-range, red mid-range deck, maybe cruel mid-range with some of the changelings with giants, you know, add in the Beanstalk Giant as well, maybe, I don't know, with Embercleave to just kind of make this really busted and powerful. And if ever Quakebringers are going into the graveyard, you suddenly just stick 1 Bone Crusher Giant on the battlefield, and the next turn all those Quakebringers deal damage to face. There is a lot of graveyard hate, but this is also something that like, okay, well, also rogues are milling the graveyard for Quakebringer. And so for me, these cards are really powerful, but it does depend on which giant deck actually works and if it's there. I think they'll see play. I'm just not sure if it actually creates a full deck necessarily, or if it's actually top tier. I think this is one of those decks that will come out and be pretty good for a while, but will potentially fizzle, or it finds a way to be built right and it sticks around and it becomes one of the better decks. Like that's where I'm not sure on this with this one. I really am not sure if these cards end up seeing tons of play, or you know they see play for a little bit and there's a decent deck that will win some games, but it will be like a 50%, not quite top tier. Anyway, Radiant God of Worthy. This is a card that I think is cool. It's the hate god. You know, like it is the it has all the different ways to hate on different decks. And so that's basically what I like this for, is I think that it sees play just because it's like, okay, well, do I want these effects? Snowlands, your opponent's control, enter the battlefield tapped. It hoses snow decks. Sweet. I have the ability to hose whatever deck I'm up against. So like in a best of 1 format, I think that this just becomes really powerful. Okay, now Snowlands enter tapped. I get a little bit of advantage against a snow deck. Non-creature spells your opponent's control with your permanent cost 4 or more, for a greater cost 2 or more to cast. All right, I now hose control decks. And this is a 3 mana spell, so it's pretty easily. It has flying and vigilance, so it's not going to tap down. It can be a good attacker. It's a good tempo-y type of play. And then there's the other side of it. 4 mana, if a source an opponent control will do damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent 1 of that damage. Bam, sweet. Now I'm good against the go wide red decks or the go wide white decks or whatever. Like I suddenly have a way to deal with mono red, or not that it'll necessarily save you, but it can help. Whenever you or another permanent you control becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell unless it pays 1. Bam, sweet. Now you have protection against the black decks, and that's where I think like Radiant God of Worthy maybe should have made it up to the top 10, but it's just a powerful, okay, sweet, I have an answer to almost every single other deck that I can be running up against. And also just having a 3 mana 2/3 flyer with vigilance is not bad stats at all, especially if this ends up, I wish it was an angel and god so that you can actually have like the Righteous Valkyrie work with it, but it can just become bigger if you're playing it in the mono white deck, you know. And I think this is not necessarily a card that sees a 4 of in any deck, but I think it's a 2 of in just about any deck that can run white, because you're just hosing your opponent no matter what with this card, and those are good things to do. Like it's really powerful. There's only a few decks that this doesn't really that's not good in, at least some of the effects some of the time. So I think this is just a card that will see play just for the sake that it's a not a meta hoser, but kind of just like, okay, no matter what I'm up against, if I have this card, I can use it in a way that will give me a slight advantage. Not massive amount of advantage, but a slight advantage. And I think that's really, really cool. Yeah, I think this is a powerful card. King Narfree's Betrayal. This is a sweet card too. 3 mana, each player mills 4 cards. Then you may exile up to 1 creature or planeswalker card from each graveyard. Then the lower counters the other ones until the end of turn, which unfortunately it's not until your next turn, where you can't play like at instant speed or anything like that. But until end of turn, you may cast spells from among it, exiled with it. You may spend mana of any color to cast those spells. So you exile 4 cards. You basically get to, okay, I get to scry 4 on your deck. I get to scry 4 in my deck. Those get milled over. I get to pick 2 creatures and planeswalkers basically out of those 8, right? 1 from your graveyard, 1 from my graveyard. But you play a deck that has those, you know, and then suddenly you have the ability to play more stuff. So this is good because it's, you know, it's dig deep into a deck, draw 2 cards, have the next 2 turns to play them. I see this as like a cheaper escape to the wilds, basically, is the kind of way I'm seeing it. Yeah, it's not just your deck. You are picking at their stuff. There is some randomness in there for sure. But if you're already trying to mill your deck a little bit, or mill them, like if you're in rogues, I'm not sure this necessarily shows up in rogues decks, but I could see it as a 1 or 2 of in that deck already. And that's where I'm not sure. It's like, if rogues don't play this, because I'm not sure they really want to go away from just playing more rogues or playing like, into the stories. I'm not sure really what gets cut out of their deck to play King Narfree's Betrayal, but I could see it being a 2 of and being powerful and good. But that's where I'm not totally sure about this card. I think it's a really fun steal your stuff type of deck. It has lots of value, but it doesn't work quite as well with tempo, because you're going to be playing maybe, you know, you're not going to be wanting to tap out completely to play a big creature or planeswalker that you hit from this, and you only have the 2 turns to do it. So then you're being pressured as well. Anyway, that's the kind of side of this where I think it's really, really powerful. At the same time, I'm not sure it's really competitive to play this with this effect. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think with this one, because I think it's good. I'm just not sure. All right, and next up we have, we're going to be diving into all the planeswalkers real quick with these ones, all the ones that aren't Tibalt, because I think they all fall into the slot of just under the top 10. They're all really good. I think all of them will see play. Nico Eris, really good. I think that the constellation stuff that we have from Theros, being able to have these shards actually does add a lot of value into it, as well as it just creating clue tokens, you know, is really good. It can also just deal 2 damage to a tapped creature, you know, for each card that you've drawn this turn. So if you have ways to draw lots of cards, you know, if you've drawn 2 cards, also -1 deals 4 damage to anything. What's the tick one? The +1 again. Up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, return it to its owner's hand. That side of it, I'm not so sure I like as much. It's pretty cool, I guess, but it's anyway. I think this is a good card. I think that it just like it fits into a few different decks. The white, blue makes it a little bit harder to put into lots of different decks out there, but there is a constellation deck that can be powerful with Arcana Sun's Grace. This can come down as an X whatever and create tons of constellation triggers for Arcana Sun's Grace. And so I think just that alone, and the fact that the rest of this card is just good, does make it powerful. And, you know, also the -1 working with, like, if you go into Bant with this and have, you know, Setessan Champion drawing you a bunch of cards for all the enchantments, because the shards are enchantments when they enter the battlefield, then you can just draw a bunch of cards, -1, kill anything on the board. So I think that it's like, I'm not sure the decks that it goes into make it powerful. You know, maybe this is one of the cards that makes Calyx good. You know, maybe it's, I'm not sure, because there are a lot of other good cards out there that this might fit in with. But we'll see if it actually is better than just playing the other stuff. That's where I'm not sure if it's quite up to tier 1. Kaya, the Inexorable, same type of thing. I'm not sure this is better than Ashiok, basically. But 5 mana, 5 loyalty, -3 is an exile target non-land permanent. That's just any permanent. That's really, really powerful. You can +1 to put a ghost form counter onto target non-token creature. It gains when this creature dies or puts into exile. Anyway, that's the side of it that I'm not as sure of. This has to be in a more creature deck, or decks that you're going to be playing more creature stuff. I've seen people kind of talk about putting this into Yorion, like Doom Foretold type of decks. I've seen it kind of come up into just a bunch of different things. Overall, I think it's good. And then you get the emblem at -7. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a legendary spell from your hand, from your graveyard, or from among cards you own in exile without paying its mana cost. So maybe this is just like the Esper control with Ugin on the top end, so that you have ways to kind of play it out. You play a few legendary creatures, like you play maybe it's like Mardu control with Valkyrie to be able to have like more legendary things that you can be playing. But there's enough things that restrict what decks this can go into that I'm not sure that it really gets up there. But in whatever deck it fits into, it's going to be really powerful effects. So like that's where I feel like this is good. I think it's really powerful, but I'm not totally sure that it's up there already. Tyvar, Kel, and elves in general. These are the two of the favorite cards I think of mine from the set. Is Tyvar being able to just all elves you control tap for mana, even if though it's not green, which is the funky side of this. Even though it's not green, it still is really powerful. You can ramp up like crazy and do really cool things. Being able to untap elves, give them counters, and give them death touch until on turn is good. Being able to just create an elf warrior is really good. And then the emblem, whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until on turn, and you draw 2 cards. That's the side of it that's really busted. I'm not sure that you really get to that very often, but if ever you do, suddenly you have the elf ball. You know, it's online. It's good to go. You just keep casting spells. They all have haste. You draw 2 cards every time anytime you cast a spell. It's so good. Elvish War Master I think is really powerful too. Just being able to make extra tokens. It does have a payoff of elves you control get +2/+2 and gain death touch until on turn. If you have tons of mana, you have a payoff to do it. Also giving everything death touch is pretty cool, where it can be on the defensive side of things, where that's something that elves didn't necessarily have as often. But the reason why I think Elvish War Master is good is that I think it turns on a few other elves that have been out there that don't work as well. There's the flashing Wildborn Preserver that I think this actually makes those work pretty well in tandem, where Elvish War Master you play on turn 2, you can flash in Wildborn Preserver on turn 3, turn whatever. It enters the battlefield, it creates another elf token. That elf token will then trigger Wildborn Preserver to be able to put X, +1/+1 counters onto it, where X is however much mana you have left. And if you can tap to add elves to give extra mana, you can end up making that pretty big. Anyway, so that's where I feel like there's some pretty cool synergy. Is there's Wildborn Preserver, which is a card that has always been almost good. It has reach, so it has some extra effects. It can become one of the biggest creatures on the battlefield, and then being able to give it death touch, being able to if there's ways to give trample, but just also go wide with it at the same time, I think gives Wildborn Preserver a little bit more power, and Elvish War Master is a really good just combination with all that. So that's where that's at. I think I have 2 more here. Halvar, God of the Battle. I wanted to make this a little bit I wanted to put this higher, but I just don't think it quite gets there. Creatures you control that are enchanted or equipped have double strike. The only reason that this I think we'll see play is because Maul of Skyclaves is so good. You already have to be pretty heavy in white with this. I think there is a warrior equipment deck that runs a lot of the different creatures out there that runs Maul of Skyclaves and Embercleave. There we go. That makes this really good, but at the same time, Embercleave already gives double strike. Maul of Skyclave is already pretty powerful in a lot of other effects as well. At the beginning of each combat, you may attach aura or equipment to a creature you control to target. Sorry. Let me read this fully. My dyslexia is coming out because I've been talking way too long. At the beginning of each combat, you may attach target aura or equipment attached to a creature you control to target creature you control. So you can have them move over, change everything up, all that kind of stuff. Which, I mean, that side of it is actually pretty cool. It already has to be attached to something. It has to be attached to a creature you control. So this even doesn't work as well with the runes, where runes can come in and draw you cards. Where I could see that being pretty powerful, giving some lifelink, giving haste with a red one. But you can't just have those attached to lands and then play Halvar, and then beginning of each combat switch them over from the lands onto Halvar. If you could do that, the ruins become way better, Halvar becomes way better, all that kind of stuff. But having it have to just be on a creature, I'm not sure that really works well. I'm not sure what deck this is in, but I do think that there is going to be a deck that is probably tier 2, not tier 1, that runs warriors and all this kind of stuff that probably runs a copy or 2 copies of Halvar, which can be pretty good. The other side of it, the equipped side of it, is way better than the Red Gods equipment. This is actually pretty good. +2/+0 has vigilance. Whenever it dies, return the creature back, or whenever equipped creature dies, return it back to its owner's hand. That's sweet. That's a lot of things that white wants to do. So even just the equipment side of this is actually pretty powerful. Having multiple copies of it isn't bad to have, but I don't think you still play more than 2 to 3 copies of this really ever, because I think that I don't know, maybe in the right deck. Anyway, that's my thoughts with that one. Here's the last one for today. Cosmina God of the Voyage and the Omen Kill. The Omen Kill side of this is the side that I think is actually good. Cosmina adds card advantage, basically is what it does. It can be a really big threat. Basically what you can do is whenever a land has a battlefield under control, so every time a land is a battlefield, which, you know, you're playing a blue card that's caring about lands in the battlefield, so it really only goes into like a green deck. Like, I'm not sure how often that you care about that. You can play Fabled Passages, play it in like, you know, Grixis or something like that as well, and basically just have this thing, okay, every once in a while I'm going to want this into the battlefield. And so what you could do is be running Grixis and Fabled Passage, play this on turn 3 with Cosmina God of the Voyage, just kind of focus on that side of it. Have it leave the battlefield. So when is it? So beginning of your upkeep, you may have it exile. So you wait one turn, you let it exile itself, and then basically what you want to do is have ways to have lands enter the battlefield at instant speed, so you can have this come back down and be X whatever, and be a good blocker for you that also just drew you 5 cards or whatever. You know, like that's the effect that Cosmina can be really, really powerful and good, but it takes so much setup and it's not necessarily good in the right plays. But because we have Fabled Passage, and because Fabled Passage is already played so much, so heavily, and there are enough cards that can just get multiple lands onto the battlefield at once, you can get X pretty high. But I think that's where Cosima becomes really good, is that it's okay, I have a Fabled Passage, I'm going to not crack that until your end step. I'm going to draw X cards, which might be like 5, and that can be a pretty cool effect, but it's a big buildup. The Omen Kill side of it is almost like the opposite. Like, it's really interesting. This goes really well into a lot of the snow decks. It goes really well into the mono blue control decks. It goes really well into different things. Whenever vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library. You may play lands from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled. Only 1 to crew, and it's a 3/3 for 2 mana. That's what makes this powerful, is that it does things. You get card advantage from it hitting, and it's only 1 to crew. This is one of the best vehicles I think that we got from the whole set. There's some other ones that I think are interesting and pretty powerful too, but this is the one that really I think like it will see more play than any of the other ones. And so I like it. It is good. I definitely I think this is powerful. It's a good blocker, good defender. It dodges board wipes while still being an artifact and vehicle, you know, all that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of different things. So how crew works too, because there are a lot of the people that haven't really gone into it. So crew is, it's an activated ability with the vehicle where you tap target creatures to then and it has to have power equal to 1. So crew 1 is 1 power. So you have to have 1 power to then crew it up so you have to tap down like a 1/1. So the spirit that we were talking about beforehand, you know, whatever that's, and this is where I think that this card really comes into play. Let me see if I can find it, is with Ascendant Spirit. I think that Ascendant Spirit kind of turns us on as well, where it's just like, we have a good 1-drop in mono blue with this. It can be pretty powerful. You're trying to find lands in general. This just becomes a good value play. I'm not positive that this is going to see play ever. This is why it's at the very bottom, the honorable mention. I think this is either a card that's going to be in one of the most annoying decks ever, or it's a card that doesn't really see much play at all. And I'm not sure where that's at. I'm not sure if Cosima actually ends up seeing lots of play as well. There is some really cool effects you can do with Cosima, but like, how often are you, like, if you're having to wait for Fabled Passage for it to be really good value, or you're just like, you play it on turn 3, you exile an upkeep, and then you're just waiting for forever for it to become like a Gadwick basically for you. And I feel like you would just rather play Gadwick in a lot of decks, or other ways to draw cards. So as far as the drawing card side of it, I'm not sure is really good. The instant body on the board where they get a bunch of counters onto it is pretty cool. Like, that's a side of Cosima that's pretty cool and draws you lots of cards. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting one for sure. I'm not sure how this ends up playing out altogether, but I'm excited for it. I think it'll be fun. And yeah, that brings us to the end. So what do you guys think of all the different cards out there? Would you rank anything? Did I miss any cards that should have been talked about? Do you agree with my ranking as far as like Voraclex being up there in the top? Is Righteous Valkyrie actually good? Or is this, or am I overpowering it? Like, I'm not sure how much the drawback of having only angels and clerics being the ones that gain you life will actually hurt this, or if there's enough good angel and clerics. Like, because honestly, clerics are pretty powerful right now too, and being able to just give everything +2/+2 in the clerics deck, and they have so much graveyard synergy as well that things just can keep coming back all the time too, with other stuff, that I'm actually pretty scared of the clerics deck. I think it could be pretty busted and powerful. I think what it was needing was a way to give all the 1-mana 1/1s that clerics were playing, give them +2/+2, or have multiples on the battlefield, and suddenly you have a ton. I think that Righteous Valkyrie becomes really powerful. Turgid, all these ones are pretty awesome. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. If you guys want to check me out on Twitch sometime, links down in the description below. That's probably the best way to help support my channel. If you have an Amazon Prime account, you can come in and give me a subscription for free. It's definitely appreciated. And we're going to be diving into some other stuff here. That's where I record a lot of my content, is on Twitch. And so if you guys want to see a lot of stuff a few days in advance, that's a good place to do it. I've also been debating on maybe putting up some of like the VODs, or like the straight, like all the things I've been doing on Twitch, maybe up as like members only stuff on YouTube. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments below, and we're going to jump into some other stuff.